This is a character analysis of Macbeth from the play Macbeth. So my premise or hypothesis about the character Macbeth is that essentially he is a tragic hero. He's ruined by his ambition, which is his fatal flaw, or hamartia. It shows that betraying the king or committing regicide will lead to your inevitable downfall, and that's really what Shakespeare explores through the character Macbeth. So in the beginning of the play, we have an exposition sequence. There's a speech by a soldier where he describes Macbeth as brave Macbeth. We learn that he's a great warrior and that he's fighting for Scotland, and that in this war he unseamed a man from the nave to the chaps and he fixed his head upon our battlements, meaning that he beheaded a guy and that he cut him from his navel all the way up to his neck. So we learn that Macbeth is a violent man fighting in violent times. But the important thing is he's fighting for his country. He's not fighting for his own advancement as he is later in the text. Now, this exposition sequence from the soldier allows Shakespeare to create a hero who he can later turn into a tragic hero through this downfall, through his hamartia. It also allows for a cyclical structure where at the beginning of the text an enemy of Scotland is beheaded, and then again at the end of the text enemy of Scotland is beheaded, showing the consequences of attacking the country. He is, in this sequence as well, described by Duncan as a cousin, and this creates an almost familial bond, although we don't know, it never talks about whether he is or is not actually related to Duncan, other than that he refers to him as a kinsman, which means he might be, but there's no evidence other than that. But it creates this familial bond. There's a closeness between Duncan and a trust between Duncan and Macbeth, and as a result, that makes the regicide even more abhorrent. So when we first meet Macbeth, he's with Banquo and he meets the three weird sisters, and they prophesise that he is going to be king. Now, even their name, Weird, which in Elizabethan times meant fate, indicates that Macbeth's fate is being spoken by the witches, that his fate is to be king. However, Macbeth can't seem to leave it to fate because his fatal flaw is his vaulting ambition, and immediately he has these black and deep desires. He essentially starts thinking about murdering Duncan, committing regicide, which at the time would have been the most awful crime. However, by the end of this sequence, Macbeth does decide that he will just leave it to chance, or indeed to fate, because, perhaps as Lady Macbeth observes, he is too full of the milk of human kindness and he doesn't want to commit such a deed. However, later on, he then meets Lady Macbeth, and she shames him into committing the deed. She calls him a coward, and she says because he durst not do it, then he is not a man. Now, clearly, Macbeth is manipulated by both the witches and Lady Macbeth to commit the regicide, but it is his own act. It is fueled by his own ambition to be king, and perhaps that's why Shakespeare then shows that he's unable to say amen, for example, because he's killed a king when society believed in the divine right of kings, so it's almost like killing God's representative on earth. As the play progresses, Shakespeare shows that Macbeth has become a complete tyrant and he's on a murderous spree. He even states at the banquet that blood will have blood. Now, this could be viewed in two ways. It could be foreshadowing his own just end when he's beheaded by Macduff, or it could be the fact that once you've killed once, it's easier to kill and feels necessary to kill again. Macbeth actually has his best friend murdered, and he attempts to get the murderers to kill his best friend's son, Fleance. He also orders the death of Macduff's wife and his little chicks. This means that he is brutally killing the innocent, and it presents him as ruthless. Not only has he killed Duncan whilst he was asleep, he's murdering or having murdered women and children and people who were close to him, such as his best friend. Now, his motivation is desperation for security, and he is so hungry for an heir to inherit his throne. But he's ruined by this insecurity and brutality because he becomes a tyrannical king. He is more of a despot than a leader. Now, I think that this promotes the belief in the divine right of kings. Perhaps Macbeth is a poor king because he never should have been the king, because it wasn't his right. Near the end of the play, Macbeth is filled with hubris. Now, that's an excessive pride or confidence. He wants to battle, he will fight anyone who wants to come at him, and he says that he will fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked. Now, Some people might say that he's a martinet, a person who demands obedience. He seems to bully his subjects, threatening to hang those that talk of fear, and he's really cruel to the man who comes in and looks pale, calling him a pale-faced loon. However, this is desperation, as soon Macbeth, as a true tragic hero, has his moment of anagnorisis. That's a realization. He begins to, quote, doubt the equivocation of the fiend that lies like the truth. Now, he's realised that the witches are not telling the truth. Now, the equivocation relates to the Catholics at the time who used to lie like the truth when they were trying to deny their faith but not outright deny that they were Catholics. What's important is that Macbeth realises that he's been following the witches and that perhaps this was a mistake, but it's too late, and he receives his justice from Macbeth, who calls him a hellhound, perhaps because he's abandoned God by killing King Duncan, and of course Macduff beheads him. So, what is the purpose of Macbeth's character? Well, we could say that he represents the Catholic traitors against James who tried to murder him during the Gunpowder Plot. Certainly, if Macbeth's character is viewed as a symbol against treason, then the play itself can be viewed as a patriotic one, almost a sycophantic one, a narrative for King James, especially as it was first performed for him privately at Hampton Court Palace, and it involved witches, which we know that King James was so interested in. But certainly, Shakespeare uses Macbeth's character to expose the inescapable and fatal consequences of treachery against the king, and the abomination that he saw as regicide. And that, of course, is why he made Macbeth a tragic hero, because ambition of that kind of fatal flaw, will always, inevitably, lead to your death.